So everyone, thank you so much who joined us. And we'll for sure be recording this session and then putting it up on social media as well for others to view it later who cannot view it today. And then we'll be sharing the recording with the our subscribers as well as our followers as well. So let's begin. First of all, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Dr. Eqab. We know him
Hi.
since a long time, and Dr. Eqab also knows WonderTree since a long time. And he's truly a very experienced professional who has been working in the field of special needs or working with children of determination for the past 16 years. And we thought that it would be a wonderful opportunity and a wonderful moment to have Dr. Eqab with us and sort of, uh, get some insights, extract some insights from him so that we can share it with our audience, with parents, with teachers, with therapists, so that we can learn and grow together. So let me officially start by introducing Dr. Eqab. So Dr. Eqab, as I mentioned, has 16 years of experience in the field of occupational therapy and helping children of determination. He is an occupational therapist and he's one of the leading voices when it comes to sensory integration and neurodevelopmental rehab across the Middle East. He is based in UAE, but he travels around the MENA region, helping different children with different needs. And he has helped so far more than hundreds, I would say, even thousands of children with their children and adults with their sensory challenges, motor challenges, with their emotional foundations, emotional development and foundational development. And he is, mashallah, doing a lot of great work. He is also licensed by both the Ministry of Health and the Dubai Health Authority. And he's also served as the Director for Rehabilitation and Ministry of Community Development. He is also the founder and operator of OT Services, which is his own practice. There are also a lot of other introduction that I can give, such as his degree and so on. But I think we will just dive into the webinar and let's start. So the topic that we're going to be discussing in this webinar is the sensory integration and how it affects the daily lives of children of determination, and how, as us as parents, as people who work with children of determination, professionals, how can we understand better what is sensory integration, how does it work, and we will ask Dr. Eqab these questions. So, Dr. Eqab, my first question to you is that when it comes to sensory integration, for parents or for professionals, hearing the term for the first time, what exactly is sensory integration, for us
Mhm. Yeah,
layman people? Yeah.
yeah. Sensory integration, the term. I would just explain it to be easier for everyone. Like, when we are interact with our environment, we are using our sensory system, right? And central nervous system, let us to say. So the idea of sensory integration, that means we are receiving a different type of sensation. And this sensation like smell, vision, olfactory, auditory, taste, all of that, it will come to our central nervous system, to our brain, and our brain will be exploring this and filtering this sensation, exploring, making regulation to this sensation, and will be able to interact with our environment. So that means receiving a different type of sensation or sensory input, and this sensory input to be like analysis by our central nervous system, then the person will be able to interact with the environment around him.
Amazing. Amazing. And Dr. Eqab, like just to for example, for anyone to understand it better, can you give an example, a very simple example of a
Yeah, sure.
sensory? Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, usually I like the example of in like our lecture now. Okay, the webinar. All of us, okay, we are receiving different type of sensory input, right? The screen, it give us the vision. when we are sitting on the chair, so we are receiving a tactile, like a touch from the chair, and our weight on the chair, and this is also a different type of sensation. Like in the background, if there is another child crying or the sound of the AC. So all of this is a different type of sensory input. Our brain is receiving it. Then the brain start to analyze and filter which sensation we need it and which sensation we need to ignore it. So for example, all of us interests with our voices, like with the webinar. So the brain will take this sound and will reduce and eliminate other sound to be focused and interact with the webinar and having a good arousal level and attention and concentration.
That's really interesting. And thank you so much for sharing this. I also read somewhere, and I'm sure you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that our brain usually receives around 1,000 sensory inputs per minute or something like this. And then, it's our brain's ability to focus on something. For example, right now I'm also receiving, the cooling from the air condition. I'm also sitting on my chair. I'm wearing a watch. So all of these,
Yes.
I'm receiving these sensory inputs, but my brain is choosing to filter them out and show me the unique experiences. Or I'm talking to you, so I'm hearing a lot of noises, but I'm focused on you, what you are saying, and then I'm processing it. So
Yeah,
our brain
exactly.
also helps us filter or prioritize what is important and what is not important, and that's really
Yeah,
beautiful.
exactly. Mhm.
All right. So, Dr. Kam, my next question to you would be for everyone is that um, why is sensory integration so important for a child's development?
Yeah, sure. When we say the sensory integration, it's linked to our central nervous system, right? So it's the foundation for everything. So, it's the foundation for the movement, it's the foundation for cognitive, it's the foundation for language and for speech. When we are doing the sensory pathway, when we are doing like receiving this different type or experience from the sensory input, right? So our brain start to build up the pathway, the sensory pathway. So we have now, like we are developing the brain and having like provide the brain with the experience and learning how to interact with the environment, motor, like in motor way, in cognitive way, socially, in different ways. So let us to say it's the foundation for all the skill we want to build it up later on.
That's really interesting.
Mhm.
So, in a way, sensory integration is the foundational building block for all the development that the child undergoes. Is this a correct statement to make?
Yes, usually I'm making an example. It's like you have a house, the
Mhm.
electricity, this is your central nervous system, right? So
Yeah.
if you have the wire in the proper way, and this is covered and all is good, it's the same like you have the integration for your sensory. Any
Hmm.
mistake with this wire, you will be having like a short in your electricity or something is not
Yeah.
working. So it's the same idea. So it's the foundation for everything.
Wow, that's amazing. And it goes without saying that a child of determination or a able-bodied child, both of them, the sensory integration is equally important for their foundation and for their development and their growth.
Yeah, sure. This is one of the misconception usually I'm hearing that the sensor integration only for like child with autism or any developmental delay child or something, or it's only for people with any disorder. The sensor integration is for like everyone having the sensor integration, right? So for example, now in the webinar, if you are feeling that you are losing your attention or concentration with the webinar, you start, for example, playing with the pen, open and close the pen, right? So here the brain for you start to ask you, give me input, a deep pressure input to increase my arousal. So this is the integration of our senses. So, it's for everyone, the sensor integration, it's working for everyone and everyone using the sensor integration, but the different with people with with any disorder or any problem, maybe they have difficulties. And here we need to compare between if they have like a sensor problem, sorry, or it's a sensory preference for them. Because this is also like a hard way, and most of the time, like parents are mixing with this thing between its preference or a problem.
That's really interesting. And I think we have learned a lot about sensory integration, and this is really excellent because now we're going to move to understanding, like the differences or the challenges in sensory integration. By the way, I just want to remind our audience that this is a very open-ended discussion. Dr. Eqab is available. He has a wealth of knowledge. So if you have any questions, you can raise your hand, you can open your mic, or you can type it in the chat as well, and we'll make sure to answer your questions. We do have a Q&A at the end, towards the end. We have some minutes for this, but we are still open to taking questions. So my next question would be, what are the different sensory systems involved? Sorry, we've already covered sort of the sensory parts, but like, what are the most common challenges that arise in children, in younger children or children of determination when it comes to the development of sensory integration?
For the sensor problem, because it's like there is no like a protocol, like there is no and like a specific thing, and this one is must for this child or not, because it's from child to the child is different. But let us to say like the most sensory system we are focused on with people like diagnosed with autism or ADHD or whatever, we are like, we know that the five senses,
Yeah.
but we are looking in sensor integration for like proprioception and vestibular. So this is like the most sensory system we are looking to work on with child diagnosed with autism or ADHD or any developmental delay or neurodevelopmental. If you allow me to explain about proprioception and vestibular, for the proprioception, it's the mean our body awareness in the space. Okay, so we have a receptor in our bone, muscle, ligament. Okay, this receptor detect any movement, light movement or like a big movement. Okay, so for that we understand our body in the space. So this is the proprioception we are looking for. The other thing is vestibular system, which is taking like, we have the inner ear. The inner ear is have a liquid and like a hair cell. So any movement with our head, it's give the brain where is the head in the movement. So it's contribute or like it's affecting our balance and weight shifting. So this is the most important two things we are looking with the child, plus the tactile system. The tactile here is not only the touch, is the deep touch, light touch, vibration, and temperature, hot and cold.
Amazing, interesting. And that's really interesting because, like we're already told to learn about the five senses and we just put it at that, for example, touch. But you have actually explained that touch or tactile has so many different subsegments. For example,
Yeah.
vibration and heat, and movement, and texture and everything like this. And for sure that if the child does not understand these sensory inputs, or if the child is unable to kind of like decipher or understand these inputs, then that is where I believe the developmental, that kind of like becomes the root cause of the
Yeah.
developmental delay or a developmental challenge that then the child faces. Um, on this, question, or on this topic that we're already discussing, how does the sensory experience influence behavior, emotion, and learning?
Yeah. Okay. So we know like any action in our life, it's called behavior, right?
Yeah.
So for example, if I want to explain, I need to explain something before answer this question. So for example, the proprioception now, we understand that the proprioception is our body awareness in the space, right? So there is a main skill coming under the proprioception, which is motor planning, bilateral motor coordination, force proprioception, which is the amount of power, and timing in space. Okay, which is like you need to understand if I throw the ball toward to you, so you need to understand what is the exact time to catch it by your hand. So this is for the proprioception. For the vestibular, it's about the movement. Okay, so if we have any difficulties in the proprioception or vestibular, so the child will be having a problem with motor planning, motor coordination, timing in space. This is for proprioception, and for vestibular about the movement. If he's hypo or hyper response to vestibular, maybe he will be like hypo response. That's mean he want to run away, just moving around, because it's like the brain asks him, I want a movement to relax. I want to feel a sensory regulation. I want to regulate myself. So they are regulating themselves by movement, by jumping, by pushing. So this is the action was coming from the sensory. It's coming as a behavior. So, you know, usually I don't like to say this example, but if we want the correct example for that, when the people smoking, the first time when they are smoking, it's about the nicotine coming to the blood, right? With the time, because of the neuroplasticity in the brain and all of that, the nicotine is come to the threshold level. So the people, they start to smoking just because the behavior of the movement. So this is exactly how they connect between the sensory and behavior.
Wow. That is amazing. And I believe the nicotine basically just in the initial stages just plays as a enforcer for the habit to develop. And then later on, it's never about the nicotine. It's just about the habit.
It's about the habit.
Okay,
exactly.
That's really a really insightful and interesting example. The next question, which is you know, like a continuation of what we're talking about, and the answer that you gave is that how can two children respond so differently to the same environment or to the same, you know, like sensory input?
Actually, this question is have to answer. One and like two parts. Sorry. First part, it's about the sensory difficulties and the sensory response for each child. It may affect how to answer. Okay. And the other part, which is like this is the newest research and study about this. It's about the environment and the habit for the parent around the child. So it's have two parts. Part of like the sensory response, because you know, for example, if we are two in one room and we put the AC in 22, right? So for you, maybe it's very cold, but for me, maybe it's normal, right? Because your sensory response and threshold level for you, it's not high. For me, it's very high. So I can receive more cold. So it's about the threshold for each child and how they sensory response to that. So this is one part. The other part is environmental. Like for example, the people born in Gulf area and people like, let us to say from any Europe country, okay? So there it's very cold, so they can't tolerate. But for Gulf, like you know, for Gulf, if going to like you know now the temperature is very heat in France, for example, 28, and we are like just laughing. So it's the same idea. Yeah.
I understand. So, if I'm to summarize, you're saying that there are two basically modes or causes. One is that you're born with some certain things, for example, your threshold, you're already born with this, and then this learned behavior, which is your environment or your upbringing. All of this shapes your tolerance or your behavior or your response towards a sensory input. Am I correct in this?
I'm sorry, it's give me as a whole. I think the connection from my side.
It's completely fine. I will repeat what I said is that what you mentioned about, you know, like how two children will respond differently. So there are two factors in play. One is what you're born with. So some children will naturally have a high tolerance to cold.
Yeah.
Some children will have a low tolerance to cold. So one is the, your how you perceive the sensory input. So you're born with this. And the second one is the learned behavior. For example,
Yeah.
if you have been treated too cold a lot of times, then you develop this, or from your environments or from your family. So one is the learned thing, and one is what you were born with. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
All right. Now, let us dive more in towards the sensory integration and sensory inputs when it especially comes to children of determination. Because you, Dr. Eqab, you specialize in working with children of determination. WonderTree also works with children of determination. So whereas it's really important for us to explore sensory integration and all of the topics for all children as well to make it as inclusive, we also want to, dive into this part, which is especially focusing our talk on children of determination. So how can sensory challenges show up during everyday routines for children of determination? And you can give some certain examples because no two
Yeah.
children are alike.
Yeah. I will back to my explanation about proprioception, because if we back to every single activity in our life, you can explain it by the proprioception. We said the proprioception is our body in the space, right? Body awareness in the space, and we said the main skill is motor planning, bilateral motor coordination, first proprioception, and timing in space, right? So I want to explain how it's affect directly on ADL, which is daily life skilling, like a dressing. Let us to say that there is a child, he want to dress a jacket, right? To dress a jacket, he need to understand the motor planning. What is the motor sequence? He need to understand in his brain, okay, I need to put my hand in the sleeve, then pushing it back, then put the other one, correct? So this is the part in the brain. The second part, when he start the movement, he understand what is the movement I want to put, then understand my body awareness that I need to pull the jacket from the back, then move it. So this is about the body awareness, right? And one type is motor planning. The other thing is he want to pull the jacket to put it nicely on his shoulder, correct? So this is bilateral motor coordination,
Hmm.
which is he's doing. Then he want to do the zip or buttoning, this is a tactile discrimination. So he need to have a correct tactile response to have the tactile discrimination. So see how this is the sensory. A normal sensation can affect an ADL for the child, a daily life skill.
Wow, amazing. And we already discussed this before, but with this example that you have given, literally, I think everything that we do in our lives or a child does boils down to sensory integration
Yeah,
or sensory input and how those inputs are actually processed, used, and learned.
yeah.
That's really interesting.
Like for
That's
example,
an
for us as an adult, when we are go to the car, driving the car, right?
yeah.
So and you want to go to the roundabout. So you need to understand what's the amount of the power to do the steering with left or right. You need to have the visual field. You need to hear, listen. So for example, like when we are losing the place, why everyone like just level down the sound, right? So here the
Mm.
brain he want to process. So he just eliminates some of the sensation to focus more on the other sensation.
Wow, that's amazing. That's really,
Mhm.
like I know this exists, but I've never thought of it in this way. And thanks to you now, I know what to think of. It's a new perspective, and that's really interesting. Um, Another question, like especially for parents, is that what are some signs parents often notice at home without realizing that they may be sensory related?
Yeah. Like there's let us to say for proprioception, I will be saying for everyone, for each
Yeah.
sensory system.
Yeah.
For proprioception, for example, we are noticing the child that he like a deep hug, he like to hug everyone, he like a tight places to be there, he just moving
Mhm.
his body always. For
Mhm.
vestibular system, the child he like to run, he climb up on the furniture, he just running around, spinning,
Yeah.
and all of that. For tactile child, we have to type maybe he just avoiding to touch anything, or he like to touch everything. The same for vision and hearing and all of that. But mainly, which is like the clear thing from like 2.5 to 3, which is moving around,
Mhm.
like a deep pressure. Don't like anyone to touch him, or just he bothered from like the brand on the t-shirt. So this is the main thing.
Mhm. Amazing. And Dr. Eqab, can you also highlight the correlation between these behaviors and emotions? Because a lot of parents, where uh, uh, where they kind of one of the things that they would love to know is that how can I get the desired emotions out of the child? For example, the child would like to hug, or a child would not like to hug, or a child might
Yeah,
behave differently in different social settings. So this is also tied to the sensory input and their processing. And if so, how, and how can, parents or other people who are not experts understand that emotions, or lack
yeah.
of emotions, are also directly or in indirect result of sensory inputs.
Yeah, sure. If you allow me to share something, I will be
Yes,
just
please.
writing
Yeah,
to
yeah.
explain, because I don't
Yes.
have the share op. Yeah, now
We
you can see my
we can see
screen.
your screen. Yes,
Okay, great.
absolutely.
So just to answer on the question, first I want to explain how it like the problem, the sensory issue, or the sensory processing disorder is coming. Let us to imagine like the sensory. We have a sensory tank in our blood, or in our body, sorry. Okay. And this sensory, we have the limits for this sensory, which is this is the limit for our tank.
Mhm.
Okay. So usually when we are hearing and receiving all the type of sensory input and processing this input and reacts and interact with the environment, that's mean we are receiving our need of the sensory, which is we come to the threshold level. Okay. And interact with the environment. We have, like, when we having a sensor processing disorder, we have two type: hyper response or hyper response. When we said hyper response, that mean we are receiving a different type of sensory input, but we are not reaching to the threshold level. Okay. So that's mean the child here will start to do a different type of behavior to reach to the threshold level, which is this behavior. It may be not accepted to our environment or to our community, like running, steaming, jumping, what a different type of behavior. Okay.
Mhm.
The other type, it can be hyper response, which is the child when he receiving any sensory input, his brain facilitates this sensory input, which is become more than threshold level. So the child here start to avoid to receiving any sensory input.
Mm.
And from here, it's coming the emotional thing and emotional regulation. If the child is seeing, maybe the child is hearing one voice tone from one person, like for example, there's like a tone, especially for a female, it will be affecting the child. So he don't like, he start to close his ears, or if he is in mall, he start to covering his ears. So this is like like he want to regulate himself, and he have like a pushing from the environment to his sensory system, to so he will be overstimulated from this. This thing, if he receive it many time over his life, like 1 year or 2 years, it's affecting his emotional part. So he's from the beginning, when you say mall, even from the home, he start to crying and maybe he come to tantrum. So this thing maybe explaining how the child on emotional regulation can affect. The other thing is I would like to explain uh, how the sensory is affecting our all skills in the life. Okay. So this is the pyramid. The base of the pyramid, we have two parts: sensory part and behavior. Okay. The sensory
Right.
part, we said we have the five senses, and we have the proprioception, and we have the vestibular, right? Any difficulties or any disorder with this one, it's come as a behavior. Or if it's working correct, it's become as a behavior. Right now, we are receiving a different type of input, but we are focusing. We have attention to the webinar. So our behavior that we are having concentration with the webinar, right? So this one, the proprioception, vestibular, and tactile, and all our senses is linked to dopamine in our body. So when we have the response to our sensory input, our dopamine level in the body, it will become be high. And dopamine is responsible about arousal level in the for the people, okay, and about the mood changing, if he's happy or not happy, okay. So when we say the proprioception is okay, dopamine level is okay, arousal level is okay, so that is affecting the attention and concentration, eye-hand coordination, motor planning, motor imitation, joint attention, following instruction. Because if you have good attention, you will be having a good motor imitation, you will be have a good eye-hand coordination, you will be have a good eye contact, you will be have a good following instruction. In this level, we are saying this level as a pre-linguistic skill or a pre-learning skill. It's depend which school, it's educational school or rehabilitation school. Okay, so this is the main part, all like OT, speech, ABA, special need teacher, all we are focusing on this part. Because here is the start for the child to receiving a skill. So if you have your good attention and concentration, following motor imitation, all of that, so your cognitive, it will be better. Once your cognitive is be better, you will be communicate better. Once you communicate better, your language is better. Once your language is better, your speech is better. Once your speech is better, your social interaction is better.
Yeah. Wow.
That means your emotional regulation is better. Let us to make an example on this, okay? So for example, now you are attending the webinar, right? And you are hearing the AC sound and it's cold and your chair, like what we said. Someone is calling you and this is like an important call for you. And then he's sending for you a WhatsApp. So that's mean you have a sensory input, which is a visual sensory input, a different one, and you have interest with that, right? Because you know there is a different something hidden between. But let us to explain about this. So now your attention, you are losing your attention with the webinar, okay? But you are concentrate with the webinar. So you are hearing my voice, but you are not attentive, fully attentive to my voice. So that's mean your cognitive, it's become low, right? Why? So for example, I'm explaining about proprioception. You are focusing with me, but not attention. So you are not hearing the full definition of proprioception. So if I stop and ask you, can you please explain to me what is proprioception? Maybe you can say one or two words or one sentence, not the full definition for that. And this is what is happening to our children. For example, when the mom, when he back from the nursery or center, what happened to you with you? Sorry, there. So he start to say one word. When the cognitive is low, his communication become low, his language low, speech low, social interaction. Why it's become low? Because the repetition of this thing, like, I don't know, I'm cannot hearing, I cannot attention. This is like emotional pressure on him and socially pressure on him. So he start to avoid the people because he don't want anyone to ask him again. Like, for example, I stop, please, can you just tell me what is the proprioception? And you cannot answer the proprioception. Again, I ask you what is the tactile, you cannot answer me the tactile. So you will start not to give me eye contact. So, and this time I'm not asking you more. So this is what is happening with our children.
Wow, that is amazing, and it ties to so many things and so many behavioral challenges that we see or parents ask us. And thank you so much for explaining this in so much detail. Thank you so much. It really, like it puts a lot of perspective into what is going on, and kind of like we're now able to deep dive into the child's mind or empathize with them more of what is
Yeah.
happening. And I really wish, and we will definitely work on this as well, to raise awareness about this, for parents, for siblings, as well as for individuals who might encounter a child of determination in a mall, for example. And instead of saying that this child is making noise or why is this child screaming,
Yeah.
maybe they'll think of it as differently. Like maybe the child is getting a lot of, feedback or a lot of sensory input that the child is not able to deal with. So empathize and basically understand. This is amazing, Dr. Eqab. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Since you have explained this very beautifully, I'm going to now just talk about parents because we're running like we're almost out of time as well. Quickly, a couple of questions about parents. So, for example, what are the simple ways where parents can support sensory needs at home?
Mhm. Usually, we are using with the parent to work on motor sensory activities. Okay, so after the occupational therapist do the sensory profile for the child and understand what his need, so we start to give them like some simple activity they can do it to at home. The idea is that there is no like one program for everyone or one like because the repetition, the duration for each child is different. But it will be like usually we are talking to the parent, just play with the child, talk with the child more. You are more playing with the child, talking with the child more, that you are giving him more sensory input. So that the brain will having more experience, how to understand, how to repeat after of them. So this is like the best thing for your child at the home. Just play with them more, talk with them more, focus on anything with gross motor activity, such as like throwing the ball, catching the ball, playing tracing on the ball, something like that, because I don't want to answer it in a specific activity because I'm scared that they are taking the activity and working with that because from child to the child is very different.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it makes sense. So, in a nutshell, is basically you're saying that the parent needs to basically figure out what the
Yes.
challenge with the child may be, and the best ways to play with the child, to ask the child to be very in tune with the child,
Mhm.
which makes a lot of sense because every child
Yeah.
is different, their needs and their challenges are different, and it's up to the parent to kind of like hone in with the child or bond with the child enough to understand this. So,
Yeah.
Marlena has a question and a good one as well, which is what is one of the most common mistakes parents make regarding sensory integration?
Actually, let us to say sometimes, when they are chatting with a friend or something, or I will give you an example, like most common problem I receive it from the parent, which is about trampoline, you know, because if the child is hyperactive, okay, we will bring a trampoline and make the child just have a free access to the trampoline. So from this example, we can say the common. The common is to give your child a free access to play or activity. If you want to make, yani, we are saying you need to play with the child or you need to talk with the child. This one, it will be with adaptive response, with something coming outcome by the end. But giving your child a free access to any play without interact with them or communicate, this is like you are like destroying his sensory system. I don't want to use this word, but I cannot find like, but you are not working well on you in his sensory system. Because, for example, if when we explain
Yeah.
about the
Yeah.
threshold level and the sensory tank,
Yeah.
if you give your child the free access to play with anything, we have a neuroplasticity in our brain,
Yeah.
which is, for example, if you were giving your child like half hour on trampoline, after time, like 1 month or 2 weeks, is depend. This half hour, it's become like a zero. This is his zero. So you need to give
Mm.
him a half hour to reach the zero, then plus another half hour. So he will be more hyperactive. The neuroplasticity, if you want to explain it easy, you know, when we are buying a new watch, every time we are doing like this moving, because the
Yeah.
brain feeling a different weight in his body. But after time, you are just forget if you are wearing
Mm.
a watch or not. And since we are saying this example, I want just to explain from this example how we can use the trampoline in a good way, or how you can use any activity in the home in a good way for your child developmental. Just any activity you want with to work with the child, it must be having an adaptive response, and you need to be communicating with the child. An example for that, if you want your child to play on the trampoline, let him to play on trampoline, but he need to do something. For example, throw a ball toward the target, or just jump 2 times, then stop, taking a ball from the one basket to another basket. So always there's adaptive response. If I want to compare it for the watch, we say like the watch, when you buy it after a time, you forget that you are wearing a watch, right? But what about if this watch is a smartwatch and every time give you a notification or give you a call? So always you are linked to the watch. I'm watch like I have a watch, right? So this is exactly between if you are working with adaptive response or not.
Wow. That is amazing and really, really interesting insight. Is to not overindulge in any activity. For example, if the child likes, there needs to be a limit to everything.
Yeah.
That is a very good insight. And thank you so much, Marlena, for asking this question. Um, so we have another question. I'm going to read it out. Eamon is asking, at what age does sensory integration develop the most, and what are the early signs of it that parents should look for?
For the developmental, like we don't have an age because it's not like a skill. It's like a sensory system. Okay. For the early sign, mostly it's about tactile. Sometimes we can understand from the rooting reflex, from the sucking reflex. He don't like someone to be hug him. He don't like the tight thing. So, but mm, let us to say this is a sensory processing disorder. It's better to say it after 2.5, but we can understand from day one because there is a sensory profile from infant, which is like this is I apply it on my child because there is a research about the premature children, mostly like the percentage of sensory processing may it will be higher. So there's a sensory processing for infants from day one, but I don't like to diagnose or give a name or give a sample for that after. Yeah, must be better 2.5 years. It will be much better.
Hmm. Interesting. All right. So we are on time, but I would like to apologize to the audience because we have some really good questions that I would like to ask Dr. Eqab before we say our goodbyes. So if anybody of you want to stick around, please do stick around because this is a very interesting conversation that we're having. So on to my next question, which is regarding parents as well. So, Dr. Kaur, what should parents do when they feel overwhelmed or unsure about the child's sensory need? You already mentioned that, we need to play with the child to get an understanding of
Yeah, yeah.
where the needs are. But as a parent, if you don't know what's going on, what to do next?
Yeah, the problem also with the sensory integration sometimes is our sensor problem, sorry, sometimes is not really clear when you work on that. Like, for example, if you work on speech, when the child start to talk one word, So it's clear to the parent. I have the outcome clear in front of me. For sensory, because you are working with sensory in central nervous system, so the parent, they cannot see. So I will say, like, you know, like we need to have a time. We need to just wait for that thing. I think one of the good thing that our webinar to increase the awareness, something like that, it will be very good for them. For the parent, they need to understand, read more, and also I advise the parent always don't look at the behavior itself. Like for example, look what is behind the behavior. So it will be easier for them. So for example, if my child is stimming, if my child have a tantrum, so you need to understand why he's doing this. If he want to communicate with me, he want, for example, something bother him in the environment. So I want, like, all the parents with us today, just bring a paper, white paper, and write what is the behavior of your child, and see what is behind the behavior. If my child, there's something in environment, my voice, the color of the food, for example, what is exactly affecting
Mhm.
my child?
Amazing. Amazing. So we have another question from a parent, and the question is, "Hello, my child is constantly moving and finds it hard to sit still. Could this be
Yeah.
sensory related?"
Look, I will be answering in general, okay, because I don't have the history for each child, but I will be answering in general. Most probably, like for example, this is one sign of vestibular system, which is he need more sensor regulation from vestibular system. Yes, so I will be advising to see an OT to check this to make a sensor profile for them.
Yes. And you're saying that most probably it is linked to a sensory,
Yes. Mhm.
challenge. All right, great. So we're just wrapping up, everyone. I know you guys have other things to do, but this has been an interesting and amazing, session, Dr. Eqab. Just on the last part, we need to talk about technology as well because technology is everywhere. So in terms of helping the child with sensory input or sensory experience or sensory regulations, what are the what role is technology providing, and how can parents or even therapists use technology for benefiting the children?
Yeah. Actually, I will talk about my experience with WonderTree. I will tell you something. Like, before I was like a visiting doctor in Sharjah, right, in Al Qasmi Hospital. So I have like a different type, like many children. They are coming from different places, like Fujairah, Diba Fujairah. So they are very far. So if we go back again to the proprioception skills, the main skill, we said motor planning, motor coordination, timing in space, which is WonderTree helped me with different type of games. So I start to use WonderTree with them, teach them in the clinic how to use, for example, because it's working. For example, the bubbles, right? Bubbles too. It's working on motor planning and it's working on bilateral motor coordination. Also, for the ice cream, when he start to collect the ice cream, also I'm working bilateral motor coordinations and also eye contact and interaction. So here it was helping me to continue my session and treatment plan program, even in he is in the home, especially that they having the report. So every like 2 days, I'm coming to the report, checking how many times he playing on the game, how his what is his response, and just starting collect the data. So for that, I'm believing with technology, especially with the special need child. Yes, also with the study, the child he is interacting with object more than people. So I want to use this thing as a strength point for me to continue the home program. So also the parents, I will tell you, like before, I was giving the parents, for example, um, like some activity to work it. Some of the parent, they are busy, there is a multiple things to do, there's an other children. When I start to use WonderTree with them, many of the parents, they are happy because WonderTree also give me the interact with the child, because when once he finishes restart, just stop, say cheese, and take the picture. So there is an interacting, and the child from the psychology part, and he see the outcome for him. I have the 3 star, I have the score for that. So for that, I'm believing with the technology.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eqab, for sharing this insights. We're always, really on the lookout for these, you can say, these feedbacks of whether or not it is working or not. And like you have also helped us out a lot with the feedback, and I'm very happy and proud that it is working and it's helping the parents as well as the children. Are there any other like apps or something that the parent can use at home to help their children with their sensory input and their sensory regulations?
Actually, because look, when we're working on technology, we need to focus on only vestibular and proprioception. But I will not recommend, because I see something. Sometimes I see some parents using a lighting app on iPad or whatever. So this one is not recommended for them. If the application or software is not interactive with your child, don't use it. To be honest, I don't have in my mind any of software or something, but as an advice for the parent, anything app or software is not interactive with your child or talking with the same tone, don't use it with your child.
That's really interesting. And we see a lot of, like parents uh, who are concerned about their children's excessive use of YouTube or TikTok or Reels. And we also advise that this is a very negative thing that, you're doing for the child. So we strongly advise against this as well. And again, like personally speaking at WonderTree, we really want to leverage technology. Unfortunately, in this area and field, technology has done more harm than good. So we're trying to, reverse that image and bring a positive role for technology. Like you mentioned, and very, very glad that, you have good positive things to say about WonderTree. I'm going to, if anybody has questions, they can answer now because we're already 10 minutes over. So with respect to everyone's time and especially to your time, Dr. Eqab, I'm going to end this right now. We have had a wonderful session. Um, Vikas, thank you. Ms. Steve, thank you so much, Marlena, for joining. And this is the account for Butterfly. Um, we will also mention in the chat Dr. Eqab's email address. So if anybody of you want to get in touch with Dr. Eqab, they can get in touch. Even if you can type in Dr. Eqab's email address while we are finishing off, that would be wonderful. If any of you have any last moment questions, you can ask. Otherwise, I'm just going to say, Dr. Eqab, it was a true pleasure meeting you, getting to learn from you. And this is definitely not the end. The talk that you have given, the insights that you have shared, they're going to go on YouTube, Instagram. We're going to do a write-up on this as well. And the idea and the objective is to help as many people as possible. And once again, thank you so much. We will definitely request you again to come again and talk on another topic so that we can help more people out. Thank you once again. Thank you.
Inshallah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Take
Thank
care.
you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Take care.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.